This is DT Grant and the Practice Podcast, where we dive deep into the hidden world of healers. This is my introductory episode. I'll be interviewing healers of all kinds, but today I want to tell you a little of the background of how it got started. When I was 6 years old, my father died suddenly of a heart attack. And at that time, I discovered that I carried the same genetic predisposition with familial high cholesterol. It was a pretty young age to discover this possible fate, but also to lose a father. Western medicine started me immediately on a low-fat diet with margarine, which we now know has many drawbacks. A couple of years later, I set out to find a natural cure for my genetic problem. It started with diets, like the Zone, the South Beach diet, Dean Ornish's diet for the reversal of heart disease, all kinds of things. When nothing would budge my cholesterol, I moved on to other things, including Ayurveda, which is an ancient medicine from Southeast Asia that looks at diet, lifestyle, state of mind, and many other factors for health. I researched Tibetan medicine, Chinese medicine, herbs, and so much more. After finishing high school, I took off to South America after making some money and backpacked for a few months. It was where I learned to go with the flow, and I practiced speaking Spanish. But after a while, I started to bore of the backpacking life, and I wanted something more. So in my future travels, I decided to look for healers everywhere I went. I threw myself into situations. Eventually, and not surprisingly, I ended up in medical school because I realized that I could be the kind of doctor I wanted with regular medical training. So when I finished this arduous path, learning many things I had very little interest in, I came out and started practicing the kind of medicine I wanted to, using things I learned from mentors I met along the way. So back to the podcast idea. Where did this come from? My friend and I were talking after she had had what she thought was a disastrous interview on a podcast, and I said, all you need is practice. Let's start a podcast. We'll call it the Practice Podcast. And days after the suggestion, I started thinking about the idea of practice regarding this whole array of the world of healers. It reminded me of something I'd wanted to do years ago. I had always loved Anthony Bourdain. I felt we had a lot in common. For those of you who don't know who Anthony Bourdain was, he was a travel documentarian, a chef, and a writer who started traveling around the world doing a show exploring food and culture off the beaten path. In his books, I discovered that he had worked in restaurants in Provincetown like I had, and his travels were very much akin to the kind of traveling I did. And lastly, he also struggled with addiction. And while I'm not a heroin addict, I definitely have struggled with addiction in other more acceptable forms like sugar and exercise and work and love. But addiction is addiction, and it's really not about what you're addicted to. It's using that thing to fill some void inside of you. So I really wanted to meet Anthony Bourdain and discuss my own ideas of wanting to do a show like his about healers. And then it popped in my head with this podcast idea that I'm not going to wait for CNN to come and ask me to do a show. I'm just going to do it on the podcast. And that was how the Practice Podcast was born. Starting with practicing to get better and evolving to the practice of healers and psychics and seers and astrologers and therapists and Ayurvedic practitioners and much, much more. And learning what all of these people have to offer, but it is also about practicing in every way to be a better human So my goal is to interview healers of all kinds in their homes and workshops and backyards, near my home, over the phone, but also traveling the world where I can capture the sights and sounds of the experiences of going to such places. This podcast will just be a series of interviews that will flow from one to the next, and I'm already seeing how that's happening. Have you ever felt like when you are doing the right thing, things just fall into place? And when it's wrong, it's like hitting walls and obstacles every step of the way? In moments of ease, we need to just go with it. But in times of resistance, we need to respect that and wait, or nothing works out. So this podcast, I feel like I just stepped onto a conveyor belt and it's just rolling forward every step of the way, unfolding naturally in the order that it needs to. So I really hope you enjoy this journey, because I'm so excited to interview all these people who I've met in the past, some who I've yet to meet in the future, and shine light on the beauty of what they do and what others have gained from their expertise. I'd like to thank a few people who have helped me along the way. Elisa and Corey, my siblings, and brother-in-law, all of you helped with feedback. Rebecca for suggestions, and Nicholas for his endless editing advice, and Ken for his first line in my podcast, and my lovely 2 children for their undying support and belief in me and what I can do. They are such wise and enlightened little beings. Lastly, I'd like to thank the band Modera Cayenne for letting me use this amazing song, To Find You. This concludes my introduction of the Practice Podcast. If you would like to learn more about this quest for healing, check out my website, a work in progress, www.thepractice-podcast.com, and follow me on the Practice Podcast. This is DT Grant, wishing you a magical and inspiring journey towards health. Thanks for listening.